Welcome, Dennis. Very nice to see you. It's amazing that I have time to see you actually, because I know that you're always very busy and you're always doing hundreds of things. So I wonder how these hundreds of things looks for you right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm busy in the sense that I'm not one of the people whose job got quit. So my working schedule has been going on more or less the same. So for my mindfulness teaching, I have a course or two courses that I run online now. And for my psychosocial care, the clients I talk to on the telephone or we Skype. Also, one or two clients I see actually in real life still. Apart from that, I have like a translation project that I'm working on right now. And what has certainly has changed is that I'm in a lot more Zoom meetings than I used to be. And my teenage daughter, she is also, at home doing e-learning, and so I try to make food for us, help her out where she needs some help. So definitely changes in that sense. But even before these changes, I used to work quite a bit from home. It's just now that it's more from home, but we connect like this, through the internet much more.
So for me, that's obvious. Like I know a little bit your story, but maybe you could describe a little bit like what is the range of your activities, because I think it's quite broad, and maybe you could say a little bit of what you do.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Higgin. I work with language a lot because I have a background in humanities. So come from Tibetan and Buddhist studies, study the history and the culture of these traditions in an academic setting, and from that I took away, some knowledge about these traditions, but also kind of knowledge about how to work with texts. So what I do is editing, mainly academic texts. A lot of people have to publish in English these days, and maybe it's not their first language. So I, go over their texts, make it a little bit better for them, try to spot mistakes. I also do quite a bit of translation, usually English, German, German, English. Recent translation project that I did was a book on the Buddhist teachings on the climate crisis. It's called Eco Dharma, very interesting and touching work like that. And occasionally I do some interpreting, so simultaneous or consecutive. Actually, my next interpreting job is interpreting an online course based on the YouTube videos. So I will be sitting here like this with a microphone, recording, listening to the teacher speak, and recording my own interpretation. So um,
I can already feel the challenge, the technical challenge in that. I can feel it. I can, yeah, I sense.
It'll be strange because usually it's like we are talking right now, it goes back and forth, but to interpret from a YouTube video, maybe it will be nice that I can press pause, but maybe it'll also be a little bit more challenging to sort of get into the flow like that. Yeah, and apart from that, I also work as a psychosocial care person, so I have a few clients in the course of as an association which provides basic attendance, it's called. So we spend time with people who have mental health issues and try to create a wholesome environment by relating to them on a very basic everyday life. And I also started 2 or 3 years ago to offer some mindfulness practices to groups. So teaching mindfulness and self-compassion, which I'm really curious because it's a very sort of alive thing if you share these practices either with yourself or with others.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. I feel that I think that there is a really nice link between what you do in the Tibetan side of things as well as the mindfulness side of things. And I mean, I think you could tell a little bit more of how you see the mindfulness today and what's the role of it. What do you think how mindfulness could be beneficial, and maybe how it also how you became interested in mindfulness, and how you think what do you think its value is?
Yeah, lots of questions there. I come from more like a Buddhist background, so I tried really hard to be a Buddhist, and then it was difficult. But then I popped into mindfulness, which has a connection to Buddhism, but it's more secular. It also has a scientific background, which I found really interesting, but it has a very everyday language that you can share these practices with, apart from a cultural or religious background. And mindfulness today is like a really, it's a big market, and it's also become like a bubble. So everything is mindfulness, and you have mindful cushions and mindful this and mindful that. So it's kind of problematic almost. Sometimes I worry, what did I get myself into with this mindfulness business? So it has these aspects of commercialization and being very vague sometimes. But sort of where I come from through my training in mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is like 30, 40 years ago, that was the first attempt to translate some Buddhist contemplative practices into a Western mental health medicine approach, and really keeping the Buddhist roots alive, but really making it an offering that you can offer to everyday populations who are suffering and who can receive some benefit through these practices, which they can learn to do in their own lives, in their busy lives, to reduce their stress, etc., etc. So yeah, I think it has a lot of potential benefits. Actually, there's a lot of sort of different studies on it. And like I said, what's interesting for me with mindfulness is tapping into some, we can say, very ancient or old or quite kind of tested wisdom, but also tapping into the our more Western kind of critical thinking and scientific approach and evidence-based practices. So yeah, maybe you can just sort of follow up on that, because it's just sort of a broad topic, easy to get lost on it.
Of course, of course. So as I understand mindfulness, I mean, let's imagine that I don't know what mindfulness is and I never heard of it before. As I understand, it's some kind of practice that goes deep inside of your mind, and it's something to become a I don't know, a better person, or a better, or more in peace with yourself. Like, if you could describe it in a few words, how you can um, you know uh, explain to someone mindfulness in few simple words, like what actually it is, because I think this is really important to understand, because as you said, it's a really broad topic, and I have the feeling that we can get lost in all of these different definitions. So I was wondering, what is your definition? I think that's, yeah.
Sure. Um, there's really, so like you say, we can speak about it, but it won't be it, right? So mindfulness as a mental state, you can only sort of experience it. Okay, so in that sense, it's a little bit tricky to talk about it, but one definition that we can use is present moment, non-judgmental awareness. Okay,
Beautiful.
so yeah, in English it's kind of nice. You can just say, it's present moment, non-judgmental awareness, and then with what you refer to, the practice of mindfulness. So there's certain practices that really create a context for that present moment awareness to arise. And what's interesting, so why it's difficult to talk about it in a way is because it's preconceptual. So we can try to glimpse almost like a moment of mindfulness now if we maybe just allow ourselves for a moment just to hear. Right? Without like analyzing or looking for thoughts, just becoming aware of that hearing is going on. Okay, and so like you could do the same with the breath or your other senses and these things. And so what's the big deal? Like what's the big deal about just hearing or present moment non-judgmental awareness? Well, if you let it sink, in a way, it sort of opens up, because you ask, sort of, does it make you a better person or a more whole person or whatever? If you really let that sink, present moment, non-judgmental awareness, it's like a form of awareness that is available to us through practice, kind of naturally there, but usually our everyday life of relating to ourselves in the world is very much in terms of past and future and solving problems and self, right? So
I can relate
to that.
Yeah, we all can relate to that, and actually there's a good explanation in terms of evolutionary psychology how that, what they call the default mode network of the brain, evolved. It was very good for our survival to be like, think about what we did wrong in the past, think about what could go wrong in the future, and really like get into those, thoughts and images and emotions that come up, because then when something goes wrong, you're already stressed out, so you will respond better, right? You will be dinner, you will have dinner instead of be dinner, if it's just about fight or, flight, freeze. But that way of being, in terms of past, present, conceptual, it's not really made for well-being. Usually, I recently read this, 90% of the time, we should do a test like this, maybe this tonight or tomorrow. 90% of the time when we come back from the past or ruminating about the future, we are unhappy. Because usually, maybe you try to think about something in the past that you can't change anymore, you come back and you're like, oh, it's shit. Or maybe you're thinking about some fantasy, wild fantasy in the future, you come back, you realize it's just a fantasy. I don't know exactly for what reason, but it goes to show that this present moment, non-judgmental awareness, is a way of relating to your experience and the world that is different from the way that we usually do, and that is available to us through practice.
But there is also this thing, beautiful explanation, first of all. But now it got me thinking a little bit, like, because there is also this thing where you dream of something that might potentially happen that already makes you happy. So it's not about present, like past or future, it's a potential future, perhaps highly improbable future, and this kind of what I feel, it's a very strong emotion for me, and it's very, very much like brings me happiness to think of big ideas. And I don't know, it just struck me that you say that most of the time thinking of future gives us negative emotions. I mean, maybe I misinterpreted, but what I feel is that for me, that when I think of future, I always think of something positive that can happen.
Yeah, and maybe that changes, when we're young, we think about the future mainly, and we get all excited about what is there to do. And maybe if we would ask old people, maybe they think more about the past. But in terms of like happiness, it's kind of interesting, sort of what is happiness, or how can we create an environment in the mind that is infused by well-being. And this is where the non-judgmental thing comes in. I mean, the present moment is kind of interesting, because if you really look, this moment. So this is one of the two aspects of mindfulness, is turning towards the moment rather than turning towards past or future. And the non-judgmental aspect is kind of interesting to unpack that a little bit, because it also relates to our emotions and happiness and suffering. Because usually the way that we relate is through judgment and evaluation, right? So if we maybe, like you said, you had a fantasy and it was pleasurable, it was pleasant, yeah. So then we react by grasping. We want to have that pleasurable, image or thought, or it could be a sense impression in the present moment. And then maybe, there's another sense impression or another fantasy, past or future, and it could be unpleasant. And then usually we try to avoid it. And then between the pleasant and the unpleasant, there is a wide space of neutral that we just ignore. It could be like now the feeling of your feet or your butt on the ground, which is maybe kind of neutral. And now when we talk about it, it sort of pops into our awareness. So what the present moment non-judgmental awareness shows you is that all of this is going on, pleasant, unpleasant. Mindfulness always includes observing and describing your experience, becoming aware of how our experience of ourself and the world is constructed moment by moment. And it teaches you in your own experience how there is something like a pattern going on always. And usually it's like this way of reacting, like wanting this, not wanting that. And we are kind of caught up in this, and we think maybe we're even fueling this, and maybe we think this is like who we are, and this is what it's about. And it can be very tiring, as we know. And then like a sigh, like you just did, like one of those moments where it's just like where you have more a sense of being, and the breath is a great anchor for being because it's always there. So that's the one way we can talk about present moment non-judgmental awareness is of being, and then our usual habitual way of doing. And mindfulness is the ability to kind of know and shift.
I can relate to that on the movement level, definitely. Like when I did a lot of practice of Feldenkrais. Feldenkrais is, I think, a movement variation of mindfulness, I have to say, where it's like you become aware of the smallest changes that happen in your body while laying on the ground, while doing and simply observing simple movements that happen, that you like let happen and not just do, but let them happen, and then you observe, and through observing them you observe the patterns that happen, and therefore because you observe the patterns you maybe can change the patterns. So
exactly, and it's what I see with a lot of dancers or performers that I've been relating in my past job. They're very mindful in a certain way. The scientists, they've developed, when they started with mindfulness-based stress reduction and doing research on mindfulness, later it came more into the clinical research, and now they have ways of measuring mindfulness. So the concept that they take to measure, for example, has 5 aspects, and you will see the first 3 are observing, describing, and acting with awareness. And I think these 3, people who have some kind of physical practice, movement practice, they're really good at that. And the other 2 are kind of interesting because that's where it gets really into the terrain of mindfulness. It's non-react, not reacting to whatever you're observing and describing, not in terms of wanting or not wanting, but more in terms of equanimity, of being with, and then non-identifying. So we have a way of relating to our experience where we're like, I'm angry, like this is me, like, and we also have a way of being more spacious and seeing, oh, there is anger, and that's a very different way of relating.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that like you are not your emotion. I think this is the big thing. Like the emotion is happening, but it does not have to be you. Like it doesn't define. You're not defined by this emotion. This emotion is just happening. Like this movement is happening. This situation is happening, but it doesn't mean that it is you. I think.
Or it is you, but you is also something which is much more bigger, right? So that's an interesting discussion, and that's why I find it's a little bit tricky sometimes to talk about mindfulness, because it's not what is mindfulness, but how is mindfulness. Because for me, the way I like to see it and talk about it is, it's not like a new object, a new thing, but it's a different way of relating to what's already there. So like we said, like with not reacting, not identifying, observing, describing. So it's not changing anything in your experience, but changing the way that you relate to it. And that's why I think it's such a great thing, because that practice we can do every moment once we know how to tap into it. And of course it's good to have like a regular maybe mindfulness practice, sitting, walking, writing, eating, whatever. But then in the practice you're just learning, like you said, the pattern that's going on, and you're learning this new way of relating to it. And then once you know that, then things can change by by your relation to the things. And I really like that about mindfulness. It's you can take it everywhere you go.
So, from my maybe simplified way of looking at things, this is this sounds like something that a business person, like a CEO of big company, would be really interested in, like changing the ways of thinking in order to be able to see different possibilities that can arise. And from like I can imagine that it might be very popular with certain kind of progressive I don't know, progressive startups or progressive simply progressive tech companies. I have the feeling that this is the kind of practice that exists in this kind of environments. Am I right? Am I wrong? How is it? What is your experience?
Yeah, to come back to where we started in a way, mindfulness these days, it can be anything really. But and yes, but so yes, on the one hand, I think it's a concept that's being sold. And then the question is, what are the roots of that concept? How is it delivered? How deep does it go? And then on the other hand, what you're saying, yes, like parts of these practices can be really helpful for people who work in high stress environments, who have a lot of responsibility, who have to make very quick decisions that influence a lot of other people. So the more you are able to sort of really perceive how moment by moment your experience is patterned and then respond more wholesome to that, then it will help you maybe as a leader, maybe to relate to your employees. And there's actually some studies also being done on mindful leadership. Of course, there's a lot of money there as well. But so mindful leadership, this whole thing is called corporate mindfulness. And it's the newest field that mindfulness has come into, from medicine to mental health to education, and now even to the military and the corporate world. And this is where it's really helpful to talk about context, right? Because mindfulness is not only like a practice and it always stays the same, like in Buddhism or in the West, or in the West in healthcare and then in corporate, but it's also about context. And that context usually gets a little bit put to the side. But in businesses, I think there's this thing about mindful leadership, and then mindfulness is introduced in businesses also for employee health, as a way of decreasing the stress load of employees, helping them be more resilient, these things. So here, maybe what we should talk about briefly is, this is where it becomes really tricky in terms of, why is the employee stressed to begin with? Maybe he has a low wage and he's overworked and he has a lot of pressure from his boss. So if you introduce mindfulness to that employee in order for him to find a nice, calm place inside where he can be with his thoughts and emotions and not judge, then it's a little bit, tricky.
But I think it's a little bit of a misinterpretation of mindfulness. I think if you're really mindful in this situation, you become aware of what is actually happening.
Yeah, there's the two hypotheses. One is called the Trojan horse. Is that how you spell it? So you bring
Trojan, I think.
Trojan horse. You bring mindfulness into a company and it'll just change. Yeah, that's the one hypothesis. And the other hypothesis is, you bring mindfulness in a company and it'll just be misused to put more stress on the people instead of addressing the contextual factors, instead of making people protest for increasing their wages and against, sort of stressful work environments. So that's, I think, where it's kind of important to have a conversation.
I think this is when mindfulness becomes manipulation. I think.
Yeah, and that's certainly becoming part of the issue with mindfulness, because it can be marketed in different ways. But from where I come, in the tradition of John Kabat-Zinn with mindfulness-based stress reduction, his first book on mindfulness was called Full Catastrophe Living. And I like it because, by the way, the German title of the book is gesund durch Meditation. You get it? So you can already see. Yes, it's a difference. So, but what I like about the full catastrophe living is that usually the way that we relate to ourselves and the world, when we, we usually want to change. We want to become a better person, more resilient, and these things. And it's not like we can't work on that. But in the end, and I think this is what our situation right now is also showing us, things are not under our control. In the end of the day, if you're a human being in this life, in this world, you will be faced with catastrophe on a lot of different levels in your life. And the question is, are you good then? How do you relate to that? Can you be present moment, non-judgmentally aware of that and almost like embrace the catastrophe and somehow maintain a sense of dignity in the midst of crisis? Or are you going to run to your mom, or are you going to run to the guy who has really big muscles and let him teach you how to manage the crisis better and these things? So for me personally, and that's where it gets more into it, like maybe we could say a spiritual domain, is of really embracing all of who we are and what we are and fighting back to in that and embracing that in a sense of wholeness that's already there. And that we usually miss when we just in terms of past and future and self. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I think the catastrophe. Once you become aware of catastrophe, you can react to it, and you can find solutions. If you ignore it or if you deny its existence, then of course you're gonna be unprepared. And I think if you're unprepared, like even worse catastrophe can happen, and then it can spiral into more and more catastrophe. So I have the feeling that that's what happens to a lot of people. And I think I mean, maybe it sounds a little bit negative to put it in these words, because we maybe associate catastrophe with something negative, and maybe it should be like this, but at the same time it's just another state of being, I think, another state of matter. And
yeah, and I like what you're saying.
You can be non-judgmental about it.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about the state of being, because that's really for me a difference whether you see mindfulness as another tool to fit into your worldview and then fix things, or if it's rediscovering a way of being in the world, which has a much more broader thing. And what John Kabat-Zinn likes to say in terms of the catastrophe, okay, catastrophe is kind of threatening, yeah? But what he says is you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf them, right? So that's,
exactly.
With that metaphor, it's a little bit more playful. So you could be afraid of a wave, or you could be really interested, what can I do with this wave? And yeah, I think, when I teach mindfulness-based stress reduction to people, like we go through what is stress like on a moment-to-moment level, on our thoughts, feelings and emotions. How do we perceive a catastrophic event or a stressful event? And then what kind of patterns can we recognize with mindfulness if we really look, that maybe are there, but maybe that are not really helping us cope in a way, and what kind of patterns can we cultivate, like with maybe some beginner's mind, or some patience, some trust, all these kind of qualities, letting go, letting be. What kind of qualities can we cultivate in the face of a difficult event that will actually help us deal with it in a better way?
Speaking of catastrophe, there is a lot of catastrophe happening in people's. Of course, there are some people suffering with a lot of health issues right now, but there are also some people that simply suffer with total economic catastrophe of their simple being that was organized upon the ability to leave the house, and suddenly it's taken away, and we find ourselves in a completely different situation because of this coronavirus lockdown. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on it? First of all, what is your prediction from your experience, because you work a lot with people who have some kind of mental issues as well. So I imagine you have some ideas on that, on the way people react. So my first thought is like, would be what would be your prediction of how people can adapt to this situation, or what would be the natural reaction? And the second question would be like, what do you think would be the simple and effective way, maybe through using mindfulness practices, to make this suffering a little bit more, um, yeah, the more able to, yeah, more acceptable. Let's put it like this.
Yeah, I mean, I just received an email by a friend. She is a shiatsu practitioner, and now she's selling vouchers because she can't practice. And so I offered to buy a voucher from her because I'm not so deeply affected. So whoever is listening to this, like, if I think what we can do as a community, like if those that are financially somewhat stable still able to work and have a income to really support, like your local store or your friends who are going through some difficult times, then that could, create a sense of community. And we know that everything that we experience in community is less threatening and less stressful to us. And yes, like we don't, I mean, I have to say, like, I'm also still processing these events of the past, like, 6 weeks only. I don't really know where the economy is going to go, how things are going to develop after this, but I think certainly for myself, I've been kind of surprised of that it keeps sort of going deeper and deeper and deeper and longer, and it looks like things will really sort of be drastically different, which again, could be a good thing. In terms of the mental health outcomes of this, I really don't, I'm not an expert on that. I think it makes a big difference now in terms of addressing your question with mindfulness. Like for me, probably also for you or for some other people, if you have learned to relate to your mind and to train your mind, or to, even your body, these skills are really helpful now, because when the outside world sort of is put into sleep, then you really thrown back on yourself and usually on your mind. And if you have some kind of practice, movement practice or spiritual practice, or way of resourcing yourself on that level of mental health and well-being, then I think you're in a really good position to really practice and to make best use of this time. And if we have resources and we are challenged, and the resources are a little bit higher than the challenges, then that's usually also where we grow, right? It might be difficult, but usually in the future we'll be looking back at a time like this and saying, hey, it was a difficult time, but I learned this and that.
I have a little bit of an how to say, an artistic take on it, because somehow I find myself being mostly in the artistic field. So what I find from this time, and I think I can compare it to similar times in history where people were faced with like extreme challenges, I find these times always extremely artistically creative. So I don't know what it is, but for me, whenever there is a challenge, I find always these hundreds of creative ideas, even too many ideas. So uh, for this part of me, which I thought already I was chasing for this, I was looking for this, I was searching for this, and trying to get it back, because what happened to me in the last year or 2 or 3, or I don't even know, I spiraled myself into this kind of salesman state of mind, producer state of mind. So all of my, and of course it led me to good results, but at the same time it took me away from myself, because instead of focusing on creating art, I was focusing on staying afloat, and therefore like being able to sell the works that already exist, and already thinking of like the next production and like how I'm gonna market it and writing tons of applications and generally like diving into this kind of other world, other part of this artistic world, and now none of this is there. So none of this is distracting me from actually refocusing on myself. So except for the fact of not having any income, I find this time pretty amazing. So let's see how long can I keep this spirit, but I find the yeah, I don't know. I never had, maybe I'm speaking from this perspective because I never had the problem of being alone with myself, and I'm sure a lot of people have this issue, but as I don't have this issue, for me this time is just a pure creativity.
I'm
like
happy to hear that.
everyone.
That sounds great. It sounds like in a way, you're not overly worried at the moment, at least, about the financial aspect, and it seems like this event has sort of uncovered something for you that you've really been almost waiting for. It sounds beautiful.
I imagined like, how to say, I don't know how it's gonna be when the normal situation comes back. Perhaps I will probably revert to this pattern, but I already see new possibilities of where my life could take next step. So I think for this it is really interesting. And also I'm like learning a ton of skills, like also just managing this online conversation. It's just already a ton of skills. So I think that's gonna be useful in the future for sure, or already now.
I think that can be quite helpful for people to hear, and to open up to that possibility. I mean, that's almost like you're almost embodying a sense of mindfulness in terms of relating to what's there, but not having to know what comes next. That's this issue of trust and acceptance, right? So you accept what's there, you see what you can do with it in a wholesome way, and you're quite kind of open to see where it goes. That's a very sort of a way of approaching almost like a mindful state. I think what I would probably advise people who are interested in exploring mindful opportunities to work with the current situation, it's just like in every other moment, really. I think this situation where there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of perceived dangers. Like personally, I'm not very afraid of becoming infected, but the danger is there as a possibility. But so when there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of perceived threats, our minds can go really like crazy in terms of constructing possible worlds of fear and worry, and the way our system works is that when we imagine that world, that we also experience it. That's why it's so helpful with mindfulness, to really be aware where the mind is going all the time, because it actually leaves an imprint on your system. So one way of countering that tendency with some kind of a basic mindfulness practice would be, to take things step by step, to find a way of feeling secure enough here and there, and usually if you look around right now, most people will be in a pretty safe place, enough air to breathe, surrounded by people who love them, hopefully, and body basically fine, so in a way, to learn to self-regulate by really like awakening to your senses, noticing when your mind goes into the future or the past, worrying, ruminating, trying to solve problems, and then like really making a practice to coming back, grounding yourself in the here and now through your physical sensations of the body, through everyday activities, and just opening up to this, like every moment, like not having to know what comes next. It can be quite, could also be a little bit anxious for people, but it could also be really exciting, like, wow, this is what it feels to be alive, and like this is happening, and I'm here, and I'm part of this, and it's like, like that.
So I figured out like there are two things that I have now time for, and one of the things I really take, I mean, I have time for anything really now, but I really take time for these two things. One thing is physical activity, like I work out a lot, although I cannot do my favorite things. I cannot go to the gym and do some tricking. I cannot go and meet for breakdance, so I cannot do these things that I love. But I can hang my rings on the tree and practice like every second day. So that gives me a lot of, I don't know, whenever I'm regularly training, I feel a sense of purpose because it's just you can already just the feeling of continuity, it already gives me the sense of purpose. And another thing, what I do, which I didn't do, I never had time to do, or I never took time to do for the last few years, unfortunately, is simply laying and doing nothing. So like being in a hammock. So I put on the balcony a hammock now. This is also another creative idea that I figured with the help of a friend, because I got myself this hammock in San Salvador a year and a half ago, and I always wanted to have a hammock. So now I have a hammock, but I never knew where to put it. But since I have a balcony, which I never use because it's close to the street, I also never used it. So now I've used both of these ideas in a creative way. So I have my hammock on a balcony, and now I actually leave the room and go on the balcony. So that's something else I never did, and I lay down, and it's really, really relaxing. So
That's
I use this.
sounds like a great mindfulness practice. I mean, I can imagine if you're laying in the hammock, you're not doing anything particular, not trying to solve a problem. Maybe you're also connected to your body, you know, and there's a sense of openness for the present moment, you know, and that's just like so inspiring, you know, for me to hear that we can use hammocks for this, we can use mindfulness practice for this, but it's basically, you know, a state of being that we can always access when we allow ourselves to shift from our busy minds, active bodies into this sense of, you know, present moment, non-judgmental awareness or presence, or just, you know, being rather than doing. And I think the way you also describe it is as very refreshing and rejuvenating, you know? And I mean, maybe
Yeah.
one thing that we didn't touch upon yet, which I also find kind of, I want to share with you actually, is this sense of self-compassion.
yeah, that's your big field of expertise. I love this one.
Yeah, being a broken human being, I know what it's like with some kindness. I think we're all experts at that, but the kindness aspect is like so important, you know, because like, how do you relate with mindfulness to things that are not going well for you, the unpleasant aspects of life? And yes, with mindfulness, we can also, you know, relate to them, you know, in terms of thoughts, feelings, body sensations, you know, step out of the dark stories that we tell to ourselves, be really discovering our ability to be present with the unpleasant. And if you learn that, also you can add some kindness to that. So I think in terms of when people are having a hard time these days with the current situation, it could be good if they feel, you know, secure enough to do so, to really become interested, become curious with mindfulness. What's really unpleasant? You know, is it this emotion, or is it you know, a body sensation? Sort of what's really getting at me? Is it that I feel lonely, or am I worried about, you know, losing my job? And like really discovering what it is, and then connecting to that experience, not in terms of the story, but actually in terms of your actual experience of it, in terms of thoughts, feelings, body sensations, making it graspable, but then opening up to the fact that, wow, I'm actually not alone with this difficulty, you know, whatever it is, whatever difficulty it is. And usually we tend to isolate. We think, I'm this broken human being and everybody else is perfect, but actually, what a relief, we're all broken, right? And we all have this or that suffering. And so in that difficulty, instead of self-isolating and feeling maybe ashamed, really opening up and discovering through that suffering, through the difficulty, a way of connecting with others, just by the basic fact that we all suffer. You know, you're never alone with your suffering, truly. And for me, that already takes off sort of the tip of the suffering, because I feel like, yes, me too. You know, like I'm not alone. And then with self-compassion, you know, you could add some kindness to that, just like you would, you know, be kind to a friend, maybe some nice words, maybe a hug, maybe some warm emotions to a friend who is suffering. You can sort of invite, you know, try to learn to relate to yourself with that same kindness. You know, like putting a hand on your heart, or giving yourself a break, talking to yourself in a sweet voice, you know, even giving yourself a hug like that if you need it. I think that's also another really good way that we can learn to relate with more skill and actually more wisdom to things that we find difficult. And it's a great complementation to the practice of mindfulness. And self-compassion is a great complementation to the practice of mindfulness.
Yeah, I always find this amazing, and I was wondering, like, how could I convince someone to do that without sounding too esoteric? I'm just wondering because, like, if I hear to you right now, um, you know, I get it, I completely get it, and it's like it's a truly good practice to do. But if I'm just like, you know, if let's imagine that I am this like. Stereotypical strong man, how can I even allow myself to be kind to anyone and especially to myself? Like if I think of people that in my family, like if I think of my father, he's a very, very strong man who takes on a lot of suffering and he barely gives some kindness to his life. So I'm wondering, like, how can you ever convince a person like that to
I know I share the difficulty. I think, first of all, it's really, if you do it for yourself, it just spreads. So I know like when we get this nice option of like being kind to ourselves, we want to share it with others because it's so nice. But like you say, it's not so easy. And maybe just stepping back from that a little bit and just like staying with yourself, like even that could be a moment of suffering that we could tend to. You know, we already know we're connected in that, we're not alone. And just being like, hey, Dennis, Higgin, you know, that's kind of tough. You want to share this? It doesn't really work. But, you know, what they have found, because of the way that we communicate in terms of empathetic resonance, if you are treating your stress with kindness, another person is also stressed, it will automatically transfer. You don't even have to teach the other person. If you stay in your practice and in kindness with yourself and in relationships with others, it'll automatically find its way over there. So that's one way. That's the secret way of doing it. And the other thing with men is just call it ultimate courage. You have to talk different. You have to talk differently about it, because it's true. Especially for men, it's not. It's even more difficult to admit that they're suffering and to allow themselves to be kind to themselves. And this institute where I've learned this approach, they actually have a course just for men, which they call Ultimate Courage. So
all right,
it's a little
I
bit,
see where this is
yes.
going. Very
So you
nice,
have to
very
phrase
nice.
it a little bit different, and they're doing. It's called the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. I should, in case anybody's interested, they have a great. They're promoting this kind of practice across the world, and they're doing a really great job of tailoring it to different populations, just like it's happened for mindfulness. Now they're doing it for self-compassion, for men, for healthcare providers, for this and for that. But yeah, if I know I know this dynamic that once you understand how sweet it actually is to love yourself again, not just others, but also yourself, and then you somehow want to communicate it to another person, but maybe they're not so open to it. It's tough, but the invitation will be just to stick with your own practice and just to let the resonance, work for itself.
I think the thing you say about empathetic transfer, I think this is really important to know that this is not just like a made-up esoteric term that you're using, but it's really something that is scientific, and it's the way that the perception of emotion just works. So it's not just like a transfer of some esoteric energy, but it's basically in a way a sense of copying the behavior of the other human on a very, very unconscious level that is just existing in our brain, like the way we are wired.
Our brains are social, and the way that we as a species have evolved, was always in relating in small groups with each other. So we are much more connected with each other than we would like to think. And yeah, sometimes even mindfulness today, it still has some kind of an esoteric, aura to it. But actually, it's kind of and also with self-compassion. I mean, the 8-week mindful self-compassion program that teaches you how to be kinder to yourself and to support yourself much more in terms of in times of difficulty. It's an evidence-based program. They have hundreds of research articles that it works, and they also have the science that says if you are more self-compassionate, you will be probably a more happier person, or you will have a higher sense of mental health. So all the ways that we measure mental health, they all correspond to the weight of self-compassion people have. So there's still sort of this aura, but there's also like the real kind of hard science to it, and programs that are based on that science that can teach it to you in a very non-esoteric way, even a way that's in a group. It's kind of fun. You get to know other people and hear from there and learn from each other. So it's kind of nice, but it takes some time. So usually a mindfulness course is an 8-week course. Self-compassion course is an 8-week course. By the way, I'm running one mindfulness course and one self-compassion course in May online. So if you're interested in learning these skills with me online, then you're very welcome to do so.
I definitely recommend that for anyone who has any kind of urge to become a better person. I think this is amazing. Like I just feel very blessed whenever I like catch Dennis, because Dennis is a really, really hard person to catch, to talk to, as I realized. And whenever I have a chance to talk with him, it's like it opens my mind for so many new things. So if you have 8 weeks of that, I can imagine that can go really deep.
Yeah, and it's also my way of I'm running. I was just running 2 groups now. One of them finished, but also for me, it's becoming one of my social environments right now. And just like we have our conversation now, and Higgin, thanks for inviting me onto this. It's just in these times, it's a nice way of relating. If we can't be with each other so much physically, then online is maybe not exactly the same thing, but for me, it's kind of working pretty nicely, even in this conversation now. Like I really feel like we have a live conversation here, and so yeah, this is one of the possibilities of our time, to use this technology to connect with each other, and this is the time to use it, and we'll see where it goes.
I have the feeling that the fact that it became this mandatory thing. So once a thing becomes mandatory, then we suddenly accept it and we suddenly can do it. So I imagine, let's say, being in a distant relationship, it always felt weird to talk. Let's say, what back in the days it was Skype, or simply video calling was weird because it was not real, because the real existed. But nowadays, as we all accept that that's our mode of communication, I have a completely different relationship with it. So it makes it for me normal, and it's not, of course I rather have you as a human being in front of me, but because of the fact that it's like in school, because of the fact that we all have to do this test, it's a bit less of a suffering in this sense.
Yeah, I think a lot of people. I've had my first experiences on Zoom were 3 years ago in an 8-month mindful self-compassion program that you can take after you take the 8 weeks. You do it's called the Community for Deepening Practice, And I was really surprised by how I met people from all over the world. I never met them in person, but by the end of the 8 months, I felt really connected with them. We did some self-compassion practices with each other. And for me, I was surprised that it really worked in terms of feeling connected with others. And since then, I've been kind of experimenting. I also run every Sunday and perhaps also every Thursday night an online practice group that's open for everybody to join in. So I've been experimenting with that format for about a year now, and I find both as a participant as well as somebody who leads, guides others in practices, it's been working kind of well for me, and I'm almost happy to see that now a lot of people are opening up who were always kind of, I don't want to go on Zoom, and now since they have no other choice, they're opening up to it. And like, for example, yesterday I just had this Zoom call with my colleagues from my psychosocial care, and I was just sort of showing them around, and it was, people were sort of kind of happy to see each other. I was happy to share some of the things that I learned on Zoom, and there is certainly kind of some adaptations that you have to do if you do things online, like in terms of like your background, and maybe you talk more with your hands like I do, and like a bunch of different things. But I'm finding it's kind of helpful, especially in these days, it's like my, it's like my substitute for real life meetings. And
Well, you are really lucky that you teach something that is spoken and not shown. Because I also I went into teaching online, and it has extreme advantages because suddenly I can connect with some other friends of mine who are not locally, who are not in Vienna, and are interested in what I teach. So this is amazing. But there is so much like of adaptation that I had to go through. Like first of all, like the structure of the class. So like what can I teach that will be possible to execute online, and it will be possible to execute in a very small limited space of their own home. So that's already like completely different change of like the complete change of paradigm. And at the same time, it's just to establish like a certain kind of a studio situation in your like little living space. That's already like that's another challenge that I'm overcoming. And then on top of that, there's the technical challenge, because yes, we can be on Zoom, but I would like to keep the quality of it, because I know that I don't know how it is with you. I mean, I'm sure like the content, the way you speak, I'm sure I would go for it. But if I think of making my class look attractive for other people, then I have to compete with workout channels which are super duper specced out on all resources. And if I suddenly show them like potato quality feed, they're gonna get demotivated on the second day. So this is something that goes through my mind when I do this.
that's really interesting to hear. I never considered doing physical exercises online and the challenges that are connected to that. With mindfulness and self-compassion, I'm lucky because there are some people who have already done it. So there are some adaptations to the program. I have a little bit of experience both as a participant and as an instructor. And I have a community. What we did these past 5 weeks is to create a community of meditation or mindfulness teachers and teachers of self-compassion. And we have just like a circle where we share our experiences. So that's helpful. But yes, I mean, and then it's kind of interesting what you're saying. Where do you adapt? How do you meet the technological challenges? I mean, I upgraded my internet bandwidth because I was constantly kicked out of my own meetings. That sucks. And
Oh,
I've had like, software issues and hardware issues and all these other factors sort of come in. And then the interesting thing is, how do you, like even now as we're doing it, how do you hold a group in an online environment? Because it needs a little bit more. If you're in the space and you're looking around, you can almost feel the people, and probably I'd be interested to hear your take of this, but if you're online and like you just see the people and you maybe sometimes you hear them, like how do you make yourself felt and how do you feel others? That's kind of where it really gets interesting then, I find.
Yeah, I mean, feeling others, it's just like, you have to imagine. I've imagined, because I remember how it feels and I just relate to this memory. But of course, there is nothing that can give me this feedback, like literally nothing, because even if I would see someone on the video, it's really not the same. And also, like when I teach, I like to concentrate on the content. So if I would suddenly have to like focus on my attention, this like tiny few pixels on the screen, like forget about it. Like I need the whole wall. If I have the whole wall, that is that is a projection, like literally a whole wall, like 5 by 3 meters. And then on this 5 by 3 meters, I have like one face, second face, third face, fourth face. Then I can relate. But if I have to like go away and zoom into like a person, then it gets me out of the flow somehow. So I rather concentrate and I just relate to the memory, and I concentrate on responding to the chat, because that's another thing. Like, okay, you're probably doing a lot of Zoom meetings. I'm trying to do YouTube streaming, so it's a little bit different because you have no, yeah, I don't look at people. I just, I just see their chat. So I don't know if it's better or worse. It's just different. I chose for this version because it gave me a better quality of feed, and I really wanted this quality of video of myself, a quality of myself, like first, so that they can have the best content. And also, a lot of people don't really want to be seen in their own apartment. They really don't want to be seen, especially how they learn new movements, because it's another thing. Like, if you do a workout, do you want to be seen? Like, who wants to be seen doing workout? Like, you have to be an exhibitionist in the first place. So it's a little bit different. I think if I have conversation with you, it's different because your face is something that you expose to the world, but like the body is more taboo.
I have that in my meditation groups where I ask people to leave their image on, but then I ask them to close their eyes if they're comfortable. But I also leave the option for people to turn off the video. For me, it's helpful to see them while they're sitting there meditating, breathing, because it gives me a little bit of this feedback. Or, if somebody falls over, you might want to address that in some way in your instruction. But I also give people the option to turn off their video, because I think they're not used to seeing themselves while they're talking. It took me a while to get used to that. So I usually also give the option for people to turn off the video, but I've never been broadcast. I was talking to a yoga teacher recently who does the same thing. She's broadcasting a class, so she sees herself on the screen, but she doesn't know who else is on the other side. I haven't done that so far.
Yeah, I think both, there are two options. Just there are two options, and you have to decide for one. And I'm sure there are benefits of each. There are really benefits of each, and I've seen the way I see it for now, I do prefer to do the broadcast opposed to. But then again, if you know that the broadcast is just for you, then I guess you also take it differently than a broadcast that is just public on the internet. Yeah.
Maybe to close off this topic, one thing, I mean, it doesn't. I've tried to combine, because you said, with online you can reach a lot more people because it's not restricted in space. So one thing that I've experimented with in 2 conferences in the past was I was going to a conference in a different country, and I was on a panel or something, and just no big deal, 20 minutes to talk. And in that conference, on that panel, I would invite people on a Zoom meeting that I would then project onto the wall behind me. And I would make the online audience interact with the physical audience. And it was kind of interesting because because we're just talking about the physical reality, the physical world, and the virtual places. And up until now, we were just talking about, either or. And, just to add this idea, it's almost like an artistic idea of like playing with that and maybe combining that. And I did that twice in terms of a talk or presentation that I gave, which then ended up being much more of a happening, almost like an event. Because imagine you come into a hall and you're expecting like a talk, and you see these people on the screen looking at you. You don't even know where they're from, and then they start to talk to you, and then maybe you can talk to them, and it's sort of. I like to play with that idea once or twice in the past, but
Wow, this is really intense. This is like Inception. I I mean, what I see now is like I see if the physical comes back, then you can also broadcast the physical while doing the physical, which like doubles your reach for sure. That's the option that I see clearly. Like if let's say I'm doing one class, if I broadcast it live, it can have a bigger reach, though, that for sure. But the question is like then there are like challenges like how do you keep the attention just on yourself from the camera? So
I know it was. I mean, when I was sitting there, I was sitting behind me was the Zoom meeting. In front of me was my laptop with the Zoom meeting,
Oh God.
and then next to me were some other presenters. And then behind my laptop there was the audience, and it was a little bit. And then I was there with a microphone, and I was like trying to say something intelligent, and I'm like, "Where's my attention right now?" Wow. But it was fun because it was more like, I think it was more about showing this, playing with this local and non-local aspect. And it wasn't a transpersonal psychology conference, which kind of fit the theme because it was about, local, non-local, self, other, playing with all these ideas. So, but maybe that's something, even in an artistic way, that could be.
yeah, I find this really, really challenging to be both a speaker and a tech person, basically, because this is what you become. Like you are the one who is solving the all the issues that happen real time, as well as you're supposed to be bright enough and entertaining enough and responsive and in the moment while doing it, while monitoring all the audio levels and if the video is recording properly, if everything is there, if the bandwidth is there. It's like you have all these other aspects of things. And how do you like this is what I, at least what I experience even talking with you right now, is I have my like a corner of my eye on this technical devices as well.
No, it happens to me when I teach mindfulness, self-compassion online. A person will freeze, then, you have to address that, or, you yourself, you have some difficulties. Somebody comes in, the camera doesn't work, and, those are all actually stressors that we probably wouldn't have or expect in a physical place that can be much more easily controlled. You put up the chairs, you put up the snacks, and you wait for the people to come. People don't appear like that or disappear like that in physical reality. But also, it's like, how do you, then it depends. Do you get all worked up around it? Do you lose your cool, or can you actually, first of all, what I usually tell people is, hey, this is going to happen to one of, or the other one of you. Let's expect this technical difficulties to happen. And then if you're like the course instructor, so like to really stay pretty cool, maybe joke about it, take your time to fix it, and then go back. But it is an extra layer of stress for the person who has all of a sudden these different roles, and sometimes it can be nice to have like a second person, who does that. But it's, yeah, that's there, of course.
That I feel that but again, it's also a little bit the matter of yeah, can you set up everything properly? Like can you invest in devices that will make it flawless? And that's why there's some devices that are more expensive than the other devices. So there are some ways to make it more flawless. There are some ways to make it more on the budget. So I think this is where it becomes challenging. And also, yeah, like there are a lot of aspects of teaching online. And generally, the nice thing about teaching online right now is that we can try it, at least for me, that I have a mandate, like a situation that imposes on me trying it. So I wouldn't do it so quickly in my life if this situation wasn't there. So I'm kind of grateful for this situation because it's something that I wanted to do. Like I always wanted to get into I mean, just between you and me, I always had a very deep fascination in radio. Like I always dreamt on being on radio. Always. Like that was something that when I was really, really small, I always listened to radio. Like really small. And then I always listened to the talking in the radio. And there's something captivating about like genuine conversations and broadcasting conversations. So I'm really happy that I can find time to do this.
Yeah, and I told you, you have a good voice for that, I think. And I have I have a similar thing where I'm kind of glad for this situation because I told you I was just translating this book about eco dharma, so the Buddhist teachings for the climate crisis, and it left me feeling really bad because this book has the science and it addresses the spiritual problem at the root of the climate crisis, which is that humanity feels like it's something else from nature, right? And if you look at the science, it's like we are in a crisis. Like as we are speaking, there's not only the coronavirus, but we are heading towards like a really bad situation in terms of our ecological systems, and we're heading there very fast. And I wasn't an expert on this. I perhaps still not, but I was translating this book, which had all these scientific facts, and it left me really feeling really bad, kind of about here we are flying around, doing our things, taking our cars and whatever, and actually there's a crisis happening. So part of me now seeing that, all of a sudden people are in a crisis mode kind of also feels okay, because the hope is that, people will get used to crisis. And also, I think our way of dealing with the crisis, yours and mine, and perhaps other people's constructive ways, is really a good practice because it will not be the last crisis, and it will probably need more crisis if we are going to try to change this situation of where this this collective situation is happening. So, like you said, I also discovered like a little bit something, hopeful or positive about that things have changed so quickly. It is stressful when things change. We are so habituated, but also our ability to adapt to change, makes us stay adaptive. And if we are going to tackle this much bigger crisis in reality, which is we basically have the next 10 years, that's what the scientists say, to turn this around, and if not, it's going to get really bad. So either way we turn it, we will have another crisis in the next 10 years or after that. So this is a good time to practice, right?
So maybe through this crisis, there arise some new leaders who already are familiar with dealing with crisis, or maybe are a little bit more mindful. Because I have the feeling that a lot of leaders are really, how to describe it? They are mostly focusing on the positive emotions. So, of course, there's a lot of negativity in politics, but I have the feeling that the general drive for the leaders nowadays is to increase wealth, to uh, how to say, progress the economy, and to improve everything, and to, I don't know, to make everything better, to concentrate on the positive side of things in a way. So even if there is a problem, is to solve the problem, how to say, to increase the demand, to increase, yeah, the general drive that for the economy to prosper all the time. So I have the feeling that this is the kind of mindset that is there, but there is never a mindset that there is a bigger problem right there and that is more important, and that perhaps it's not just about increasing the wealth or increasing the cash flow. I hope there will come times where there are a little bit more responsible people at the head of the organizations.
And I think everybody can be a leader. these days there's a story by this Vietnamese Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, and he fled Vietnam, I think, when there was some political upheaval in the 70s, and they would flee by boats, and they would be, trying to reach China or Japan or whatever, and then maybe there was large waves, or they get caught by some army or some police, and then everybody in the boat would freak out. But he says if there was just one person on the boat who would stay calm, that was enough. So I think in these times where there's a lot going on in the world, a lot of changes, if there is you or me or another person who stays calm and connected, connected to our own inner resources, connected to other people in this situation, then we become leaders. We don't have to be on the top of some hierarchy. And we also become leaders, just by, if there's a lot going on, people are freaking out, and you're able to stay calm and centered and cool-headed and act, upon your heart and whatever you know, then you are a leader. And we will need a lot of leaders like this because, I think the political leaders, the leaders on top of the hierarchy, they're not really the leaders in the sense that, as we are experiencing, they're not really they're not really taking charge. So we really need a new role of leadership, right? So I think we can all be leaders like that.
Well, that's very, very optimistic. I like that. Really like that. Yeah. So I guess having that said, I think that maybe can I draw a little conclusion about mindfulness, about being connected a little bit more to the natural world? Is it a fair conclusion to take? That because you spoke about the crisis of the environment and how humans are dislocated themselves, and I'm just wondering if a mindfulness or a state of mindfulness could be a state of being a little bit more connected with our roots as animals. Is it something like that?
Yeah, we can maybe sort of close with that. That's interesting. When I translated this book, I thought to myself, this is actually everything that we will do in these next 10 years has to be connected to climate change in some way. I would say that's my insight. And so for me, that meant, how does mindfulness and climate change go together? And here again, we have, usually mindfulness is taught in a framework, and we were just talking about frameworks of the individual. So emotions, thoughts, body sensations. It's the aspects of experience, present moment experience of an individual. And that can be a good beginning, but then you want to also include the social, the interpersonal, the social, and the global aspects of mindfulness, which is not only how do we relate to our individual aspects of experience, but every experience is always related to others, socially embedded, and related to our environment, globally embedded. So in that sense, mindfulness can play also an important role if we awake to what is causing suffering and pain on a social level, what patterns, what structures, what habits, and on an environmental level. And in terms of one possibility that I see mindfulness could help us here, there's these studies about people will help or act if they feel connected with something, like you will help your brother, but you maybe won't help your cousin, so, or you will help your, and there's a concept, a construct, is called nature relatedness, and it has cognitive and emotional aspects. It means, in how far do I experience my own being, myself, to be related to nature or included in nature or part of nature, either in terms of my self-concept or of my feeling. And one way of fostering the connection to nature would perhaps to perform mindfulness practices in nature. And it's interesting because in this book it's also stated, if you look at the story of the Buddha, The Buddha was always meditating under trees. He was wandering around, living, doing the rainy season retreat, these kind of things. So what the author is basically saying, sometimes spiritual practice takes us to a transcendent world of, bliss or emptiness or whatever. But what we need now is really like a spirituality that's in touch with the environment and the here and now in this world. And so to work more towards that. And I think mindfulness can play a role in that as well.
Oh, Buddha or maybe even Moses, I could think. Like anyone who goes in some kind of desolation and any kind of prophet in this way. Yeah, I think this is really interesting, and I think in Austria, surprisingly and not surprisingly, it is actually quite popular. I mean, I know a lot of people who, because there's a lot of course, countryside, and there's a lot of living, there is a lot of lifestyle that people, okay, they work in the cities, but they live outside of the cities. And I think it's really interesting with a certain part of these people, or this part of the people that I know, is they always are connected with nature more. And there is this big thing on, at least on an Austrian level, where some kind of ecological or biological food is a norm. It's not like a high class hippie, uh, you know, high class hippie thing that some people decide for. It's really a norm, and a lot of people have consciousness about it, and a lot of people that I know, at least, perhaps it's connected with the artistic circle, but I hope not. A lot of people that I know are also gravitating towards those vegan movement, or generally like against the suffering of animals. So I think that the consciousness is there, at least here, and which I'm really happy, because I'm from Poland, and in Poland it is there, but it is there in the big cities only. So and I really, in Austria it's even the opposite. So I find this really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, another way that
Anyway,
mindfulness, maybe
yeah.
just for the last part, can help, because you talked about this growth mindset. I mean, that's also the problem, that we are basically ruining this planet by the way that we have guidelines for our economy always to grow and to grow and to grow, and they have this day, every year it comes sooner, where we've already used up one Earth, right? And one thing with mindfulness that we haven't touched upon so much, but which is also included, is joy. It's appreciating the pleasant experiences that are also there, that we tend to forget about because we have this negativity bias as humans, right? So, if you can really tap into, like, even now, all this technology that's surrounding us, all this clothes, we have this beautiful body, fresh air to breathe, we have friends who are doing Zoom calls with us. So I think there's a way of being in the world, and you can cite examples of the past or present examples of people who have accessed this state of appreciation, joy, and gratitude. So really taking in the good that it's in our experience. I think we will also need this because, the changes that we need to make as a global civilization is not only, going to vegan and organic, but actually degrowth. So consuming less, traveling less, like maybe nothing, or I don't know. But so at the same time, you need people to be inherently, almost from the inside, happy and joyful. And I think mindfulness, and especially mindfulness of pleasant experiences, the many wonders of the present moment, even just this one present moment that's like a gift surrounding us, with appreciation and joy, is a really good way for people to help people to consume less and be more, just be. Imagine if we had a culture of being with each other and being with the world. It'd be a beautiful culture. We would share, things like that. So that's also one thing that perhaps mindfulness could help in terms of the structural changes that we need to make as a global culture.
I really think that this is the best time to be alive in the whole history of humanity, definitely. That, I mean, we have all these wonders, and it generally, I think the amount of suffering is generally lower than it used to be. Just already on the simple things like having a clean toilet, or you know, having clean food, or having medicines. Like, this is incredible. Like, we live for a very long time, and we have a lot of opportunities to have experience that is not just related to survival and reproduction. So it's really amazing that we can talk about mindfulness, and it's it's exactly. And even on the level of technology, it is so possible to be broadcasting nowadays. And if I think, like, even 10 years ago, it was not like this. It was possible to broadcast, but you have 3 pixels. And now look at it. I can almost touch your face. It's so clear. It's incredible. And I didn't spend a fortune on it. So that's another thing.
Yeah, it's in terms of technology, we're doing really good. In terms of inner experience, we have space to grow. That's why, the combination of these different cultures, like I think you referred to it East and West. I wouldn't sort of put it like that, but yes, in terms of technology, we're very advanced, and we also have some cultures who have advanced very much in terms of the inner technologies, right? And if we put that together, yeah, I think we can do, we can do our best. And it's all the present moment is always the best moment to live in. So we're blessed always.
Okay, wonderful. I think this is a very very nice quote from you, and I think I will use it on the title of this video. The present moment is the best moment to live in. Thank you so much, Dennis. That was Dennis Johnson, and I highly recommend you joining his courses and generally checking out what he's doing, because he's doing so many amazing things. But most of all, he's doing so many amazing things on such a high level that I think is unprecedented, and I highly support that. And thank you for taking your time, for your busy schedule, because I know.
Yeah, it was really nice to reconnect. I mean, like you said, we haven't seen each other in a long time, and I really liked this exchange. Thanks for all the questions and the invitation, and I really liked our exchange about Zoom teaching and if it's physical or if it's more of a mental practice. And yeah, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.